Hello and welcome to Nithrania YouTube channel. You're watching another episode of the Game in a Nutshell series designed for explaining the board game rules. My name is Branislav Berec, and in this video we're going to learn how to play the game called Endless Winter Palo Indians. I have the Czech version of the game here, but the game is language independent, so let's get started. To set the game up, each player chooses a color and takes one player board, they're all identical, then two resource markers, one random chief card with the corresponding chief figure, and place that chief figure into the base of your color. These are your tribe figures. Then these are camps, place them in the rightmost spaces of this foot track. These are villages and megaliths. Place two neutral megaliths in the first space and then two megaliths in each of the four remaining spaces. Also, take this burial cap card and the 9 starting cards of your color. Then prepare the game board. Sort these sacred stones into two piles. These are sacred stones from Era 1 and Era 2. Shuffle them and deal random sacred stones from Era 1 into this area and from Era 2 into this area. Now, these white spaces will always have a sacred stone. These spaces will have a sacred stone in a 3 and a 4 player game, and this one only in a 4 player game. I'm setting up a 3 player game here, so these two spaces will remain empty. This is a round marker, place it on the number 1 of the round track. Then each player places their scoring marker in the 0 space of this scoring track. And this is the turn order track. Place these tribe markers here in random order. Then place this animal board near the game board. Shuffle the deck of all animal cards and reveal the number of cards equal to the number of players in the game plus 1. So in a 3 player game you would reveal 4 cards. Then sort these tribe cards into 5 tribe decks. Each of them has 15 identical cards, and place them under the game board in the space with the matching icon. Then sort these culture cards into 2 decks. One of them has this number 1 symbol in the top left hand corner. The other deck of the Era 2 culture cards, has number 2 symbol in the top left hand corner. Place this deck face down and place this culture cap card on top of that deck. Then shuffle the culture cards from Era 1, place the deck face down and deal 8 cards face up like this. Then this is the idle board, and each player places one of their idle markers in the starting space of each idle track. Then we will prepare the terrain board. Take this base terrain tile, then one land terrain tile of each type, there are 6 of them, and then in a 2 and a 3 player game, take 6 glacier hexes and 6 random land terrain tiles and put all the remaining tiles back to the box. In a 4 player game, you would only take 3 glacier hexes and you would randomly choose 9 of the remaining terrain tiles. Since we are demonstrating a 3 player game, we will take 6 glacier tiles and 6 terrain tiles. Now shuffle them all together except for the base tile and start placing the tiles randomly so that you get a pattern like this. Then each player takes the leftmost camp from their player board and places it on the base terrain tile. Then create this megalith board using any pattern that you find in the rulebook for your current player count. Finally, shuffle these setup cards and deal 1 randomly to each player. Then gain the bonuses from that card. In this example, we have 2 tools and 1 food. And in addition, we have 1 tribe card with this symbol. That's one of these cards. And these icons are the animal cards. Find those cards in the animal deck and then shuffle the deck. And you can find those cards based on these symbols. Then take the tribe card you have gained from the setup card, add the brave from your starting deck, and also the tribe's woman. Set these 3 cards aside, shuffle all your remaining starting cards, and place the deck in this space. This is your draw deck. And then draw 2 additional cards into your hand and always keep your cards in your hand hidden from other players. With that, the setup is complete, you can discard the setup cards and we can start the game. One last note, your chief card is double-sided. It has a different effect on each side, and each player chooses individually which side they would use for the rest of the game. Endless Winter takes place in North America around 10,000 years before the Common Era. Players guide the development of their tribes across several generations, and each round of the game represents roughly one generation. The game is played over 4 rounds, and each round has 3 phases. First one is the action phase, where players take turns and perform various actions. Then there is an Eclipse Phase, which is some sort of income phase and administration phase, and then the preparation for the next round. During the action phase, players take turns in this turn order, and on your turn you may play a culture card for the effects of the card, and then you will place one of your figures on the main board to perform the selected action. I'm going to describe these actions in more detail later in the video, but in general, you will gain more food and more tools. You will also gain more cards or bury cards, which is some sort of removing the cards from the game. You will also collect these animal cards for endgame scoring or special effects. You will move on these idle tracks for the endgame scoring as well, and you will place and move these camps to take control of these hexes for the Eclipse Phase income. To perform actions, you will need to play cards from your hand with this symbol. This is a work symbol, so this is something like an action point, and then at the end of your turn you will take all the cards from the play area and place them in a discard pile. Then it's the next player's turn. During the action phase, each player will take 3 turns, and at the end of the 3rd turn, players will have a chance to play cards for their Eclipse effects. Because then, in the Eclipse phase, players will gain income. They will first determine the new turn order, gain income from the hexes on the terrain board, from the cards with your Eclipse effects, and also from your player board. The game ends at the end of 4th round, after the Eclipse phase, and in addition to the victory points you gain over the course of the game, primarily from these sacred stones, you will score victory points from this offering track for your remaining tools and food using this conversion rate. And also from this honor track, you will gain victory points based on the position of your marker on this track and based on how many cards you have buried over the course of the game. Finally, you will score victory points based on the sets of the animal cards you have collected. Then the player with the most points is the winner. So during the action phase, players take turns, starting with the first player on this turn order track and then continuing down until each player has taken 3 turns. Now, first thing you can do on your turn is to play any number of culture cards. Those are the cards with this symbol in the top left hand corner. After playing the culture card, you may immediately perform the actions on that card. The first culture card is free. For each additional culture card you play, you must discard 1 card from your hand. Playing these culture cards is optional. You may skip this step if you want to. If you do play the culture cards, keep them in this play area until the end of your turn, so don't discard them after resolving. You can find the explanation of all the icons in the game at the back of the rulebook, but I will cover some of the basic symbols very quickly now. For each hammer symbol you gain 1 tool, for each food symbol you gain 1 food. If you would be at the maximum capacity and you gain additional food, that is lost, and you can increase this maximum capacity by placing camps on the terrain board, which is actually a symbol that looks like this. A tent with the arrow pointing down indicates that you can take the camp and place it directly on this base terrain tile. When you have the camp icon with the arrows pointing to the right, you may move the camp. If you have 2 arrows, you may move 2 different camps, or you can move one camp twice. This symbol indicates that you have to take a card from your hand and discard it, and if there's an arrow here, you may perform this effect only once. There are many other symbols on the cards, but I'm not going to explain all of them now. I will explain a lot of these symbols when covering these action spaces. So after playing a culture card or culture cards, in the next step you must place one of your figures on the main board. You may choose any of your figures, either your chief or the tribe figures. You have two options. You may either place it in this space, this is called the rest space, and I'm going to cover that at the end of this chapter, or on one of these 4 action spaces on the game board. And I will start explaining taking that action. Each action column is divided into 3 areas, the top one, middle one, and then the bottom one. When you place your figure in the action column, you place it first in this top area, and then, as indicated with this infinity icon, you may carry out the depicted action or actions as many times as you want or as you can afford. You can perform those actions in any order you want. So for example, here you can pay a tool, place a tent, then you can pay a labor and move it, then again pay a labor and move the tent, then pay another tool and place another tent, after that pay a labor and move it, and so on. As you can see, many actions require this labor symbol, and you generate these labor points by playing tribe cards from your hand. Each tribe card has this labor symbol. This is 1 labor, this one is 1.5 labor, but you may also generate labor by spending food. If you spend the food and you cross this labor symbol, you gain that labor. So if I would go like this, that would generate 1 additional labor. So currently I would have 1 plus 1.5 plus 1, that's 3.5 labor. That would be, for example, enough to take this action. Then each action column has a symbol. If you take the action with that symbol and you play the tribe card which has the same action symbol followed by an effect, in this case a labor point, you get that labor point. So in this example I will get 2 labor points with just 1 card. If you play this brave, it gives you this additional labor point without any prerequisites, so essentially you get 2.5 labor points. And if you play this kind of tribe card, you get this additional 1.5 labor points just by spending a tool. And note that during the action phase, when you play the card, you only gain the top effect on the card. These Eclipse effects are ignored. They're only relevant if you play the card for the Eclipse phase. I'll talk about it in just a minute. So, when you're done taking the actions from this top area, you move your figure to the middle area, where you can only perform this action once. You have to pay what's indicated here, and then you gain the benefits on the right side. After that, if you are the first player to place your figure in this bottom area, you also gain this effect. Any other player taking this action column later in the same round will simply move to the bottom area without any effect. So this bonus is only taken by the first player in the current round taking that action. Now the second option on your turn, after you play the culture card optionally, instead of taking your figure and placing it in one of the action columns, you may place that figure on the rest space on your player board. You may place more than 1 figure here in this space. When you do, you take 1 card from your draw deck and add it to your hand. Then you may use one of your animals if you want to, and that's all you do. However, each figure will provide 1.5 of the labor points during the Eclipse phase. In the third step, you take all the cards from your play area and place them in the discard pile. However, do not draw any new cards from your draw deck. That will only happen during the Eclipse phase. Then if this is your third turn of the round, which means you have placed your third figure either on the main board or on your rest space, you may place any number of the culture or tribe cards in your hand face down in your play area. This is called your Eclipse pile. Any other cards that are still in your hand remain in your hand for the following round. Then, when all players have taken 3 turns, the action phase is over. I'm going to quickly explain these action columns now. With this first one, when you spend a tool and a labor point, for each tool and labor, you may take any card you want, and when you do, you put it directly into your hand. And if you take the action multiple times, as this symbol indicates, you must take cards from different decks. Then this symbol indicates that after you pay a food, you may take one tribe card, any one you want, but this time it goes to your discard pile, which is this area next to your player board. Then this symbol, which is the same as this one, allows you to bury one card. You can bury a card from your play area, from your discard pile, or from your hand, and when you do, take that card and place it under this burial cap card. Buried cards are basically removed from the game, so by burying cards you can actually thin your deck, but very important, you can gain victory points for the buried cards at the end of the game if you move your marker on this idle track. And you do that by using this symbol. For each such symbol, you may move one of your markers one space up on either of these tracks. Then when you take this action, for 3 labor points, you may take 1 culture card. You may take any of the culture cards in the display, and when you do, put it directly into your hand, but don't refill the empty space. That will only happen during the preparation phase. Then with this action, you may spend certain amount of food and tools to gain one of the sacred stones. You place the sacred stones in these spaces on your player board, and you place them from left to right, and each space shows how many tools and how much food you need to spend to place a sacred stone here. In this example, it is just 1 food and 1 tool. Then after that you can immediately bury 1 card, and then choose any available sacred stone from the display. And in the first and the second round, you may only choose the sacred stones from this area. Starting with the third round, you may choose any sacred stone. So take the chosen tile, place it in the corresponding space on your player board, and you will score victory points for each such tile during the Eclipse phase. Then in this action column, you will place camps on the terrain board, move them, and build villages. So with this first action, you may place a camp on the terrain board. So after paying the tool, take the leftmost camp and place it on the base tile. Then for each labor you pay, you may move 1 camp. When moving the camp, you can move it from the current position to any adjacent hex. Then with this middle action, if you spend 3 food and return 3 camps from the terrain board, you may build a village. You must have those 3 camps in this triangle pattern, and that must not include this base tile. You may build a village. Take the leftmost village from your player board, place it on this juncture between those 3 hexes, and return all the camps from those 3 hexes back to your player board. The bonuses under these villages are again triggered during the Eclipse phase. Each village provides 2 influence points on each of the adjacent hexes, while camps only provide 1 influence point. As I said, that trigonal shape may not include the base tile, so in this example, purple player may not place the village here. Finally, this last action column. First, for 1 labor point, you may add 2 animal cards to the animal board. And you do that by flipping the top card of the deck and placing it on any empty spaces. And if there's only 1 empty space and you may draw 2 cards, you only draw 1. If there would be more empty spaces on the animal board, you may repeat this action multiple times. Then with the next action, after you spend a tool and a labor point, you may take one of those animal cards, one of the face-up cards from the display, and place it under your player board in your animals area. Don't refill the empty space, remember you do it with this action. If the entire animal board would be empty and the draw deck would be also empty, you may still take this action, but instead of taking a card you would simply take one victory point. Then with this middle action you may use one of your animal cards. To use the animal card, rotate it 90 degrees, which indicates it has been used, and then take the reward shown on the card. In this example you would gain 1 movement on the idle track and 3 food. This is a great way how to gain food. However, used animal cards are not counted for the endgame scoring. On the other hand, there are some sacred stones which award victory points for your used animals. And finally, the first figure to take the action in this column in the round can take this reward, which is taking the top card from the animal deck and placing it face up in your animal area. One last note, when you take an action with your chief figure, you follow the same rules as with your tribe figures, with one exception. If you place that chief figure on the action with this symbol, so in our example, it would be this action column indicated by the same symbol. You may use the special effect, special ability on your chief card. You may use it once per turn and only if you take that turn with your chief in the corresponding action column. But when you have a chief card with this kind of special ability which is not related to any action column, you can use that special ability again once per turn when you use your chief figure, and even if you place your chief figure on the rest space. There are 2 more things that we need to cover, and first we'll talk about the Megaliths. Anytime you gain a benefit with this icon, you may place a Megalith from your player board on the Megalith board. Take the leftmost Megalith from your player board and you may either place it on one of these 4 starting spaces or to any space which is orthogonally adjacent to any other Megalith on this Megalith board, even next to these neutral Megaliths. The first 2 Megaliths you build must be these neutral Megaliths, and although they can be placed on any space, they are the only monoliths that can be placed on these starting spaces. Now, as this icon indicates, you can immediately place another monolith in the direction of these arrows. So this would be your first one. Then you can take the next monolith and place it in the direction of these arrows. So let's say over here. Immediately take the benefit from that space as well. Now your first 2 monoliths, the gray ones, must be placed directly on the monolith board. However, once you start placing the colored ones, you may place these on top of other megaliths if they are in this square pattern, 2 times 2 megaliths. So for example, like this. When you do, you don't get any benefits shown on the monolith board, but you score victory points. You score 1 victory point for each megalith you covered. In this example, it would be 4 victory points. And if you place the megalith on top of megaliths of other colors, those players score 1 victory point for each as well. So in this example, the yellow player would score 1, 2, 3, 4 victory points for those 4 megaliths, and then 1 and 2 additional points because these megaliths are yellow, and the purple player would also score 1 victory point. It is also possible to place a monolith on top of the 4 monoliths which are on top of other monoliths below. In this case, you score only the victory points for the 4 monoliths you have covered with your new monolith. So here, the yellow player would score 4 victory points plus 1 for this megalith. Now, green player would score 2 victory points and purple player 1 victory point. And finally, we'll talk about this idle board. Anytime you gain an idle, move one of your markers 1 level up. There can be multiple markers in the same level. The relative position of the markers on this offering track doesn't matter. The position of the markers on this honor track does matter. So the first marker reaching each row will be in the leftmost position. All other markers will be placed in the first empty space to the right of the previous markers. When you reach the row with this bonus, gain those victory points immediately. Similarly, on this track, when you reach the space with the reward, take that reward immediately. The position of your markers on this offering track determines how many victory points you will gain for your leftover tools and food, and the position of your marker in this owner track will determine how many points you will score from the cards you have buried. At the start of the Eclipse phase, move the round marker to the next Eclipse phase and then complete the following steps. First, all players reveal their Eclipse piles. Then each player calculates their labor points on the revealed tribe cards plus 1.5 labor point for each tribe figure or chief figure in this rest space. In our example, we have 1.5 times 3, 4.5 labor point for this player. These labor points now determine the new turn order for the following round. The player with the highest number of labor points goes first, the player with the lowest number goes last. If two players are tied, switch their relative position. As I said, you may play any number of tribe cards, but also culture cards in your Eclipse pile, and these culture cards are returned back to your hand. They don't have any labor points here, and the only reason why you would play them is to bluff opponents about how many cards you're actually going to play and how many labor points you may accumulate for the turn order. Now, in this new turn order, each player performs the following steps in this order. First, gain the benefit from this order track. This green player will be able to place one Megalith on the Megalith board, which I'm going to cover in just a minute, or instead of that, any other benefit below. Which means that later yellow player would be able to draw a card or take any other benefit below, but the yellow player would not be able to place the Megalith. Then perform the Eclipse effects on your cards. In this example, we would gain one tool and one movement on the idle track. Then gain the benefits from this terrain board. For each hex where you have the most influence, gain the indicated benefit. Each camp is worth 1 influence point, each village provides 2 influence points for each adjacent hex. So here the green player would gain 2 food, then 2 victory points, and here in this hex the green player is tied with the yellow player, which means both players would gain 1 movement on this idle track. To finish the example, on this hex only purple player would gain the benefit because they have 3 influence, yellow player only has 1 influence. Finally, take the benefits from the player board. First, for each village removed, draw 1 card from your draw deck and add it to your hand. Then, for each empty Megalith space, if you would have them, you would gain the benefit shown on that space, and then you would score victory points from your sacred stones. Only now you can take the cards from your play area, these were the cards selected for the Eclipse phase, and place them in your discard pile. After you do this for each player, the Eclipse phase is over. Then the last phase is the preparation phase. You skip the phase at the end of the 4th round because it's the end of the game. In each previous round, move the round marker to the next round. Return all the figures back to your player board. If needed, refill the enemy board by drawing the cards from the top of the deck until there are a number of cards equal to the number of players in the game plus 1, so again in a 3-player game until there are 4 cards. Then at the end of the first round, refill all the empty spaces in the sculpture display with the cards from the first era, and then place this culture cap card on top of the deck of this first era culture cards. Then at the end of the second round, first remove all the remaining culture cards in the display, and then refill the display with 8 cards from the era 2 deck. Then at the end of round 3, again, you would refill the empty spaces with the cards from the era 2 deck. Finally, draw 5 cards from the draw deck, and if your draw deck would be empty, shuffle your discard pile, create a new draw deck and continue drawing cards until you draw 5 cards. There is no limit to the number of cards you can have in your hand. The game ends at the end of round 4 after the Eclipse phase. In addition to the victory points you gain over the course of the game, score the victory points from the offering track and from the honor track. Add up the number of your leftover tools and food. In this example it's 4 plus 5, that's 9. And then the position of your marker determines the ratio you use to convert those leftover tools and food to victory points. In this case, this entire area scores 1 victory point for each 3 leftover tools and food. So in our example that would be 3 victory points. Then the position of your marker on this honor track will determine how many victory points you will score from your buried cards. But unlike the offering track, on the honor track the order of the markers matters. The first marker, which is highest on the track, and if there are more than 1 markers on the same row, the marker on the left is considered to be the first, would score the number of buried cards using this table. Then the second player would use this table to score the buried cards, and then all other players would use this table. So in case of the green player, that player is second in the order here. So we would use this table. The green player has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards buried, which means the green player would score 6 victory points. If the green player would be highest on this track, instead they would score 10 victory points. Then score the sets of your animal cards, but don't forget the cards you have used don't count. The maximum size of each set is shown on the card. Here it's maximum 4 cards. These mammoths can only create the set of 2 cards. Then the number of cards in each set determines how many points you will score for that set. And note, you may have maximum 1 set of each color. This symbol means that this card is a wild card and can be used in any set in any color. And finally, score these victory points on all your cards, either in a draw deck or discard pile or even buried cards, and also on the cards which you would still have in your hand. And then the player with the most victory points is the winner. So that's how you play Endless Winter. If you have any questions or comments, I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. If you like the series, please subscribe. You can support the channel on the Patreon page. You can click the thank you button under the video and send us some symbolic support. You've been watching Game in a Nutshell. My name is Branislav Berec and hope to see you next time. I would like to thank everyone who has ever supported the channel, and especially the current supporters listed on this page. If you too would like to support the channel in creation of videos like this and other video tutorials and other content on this channel, please visit the patreon.com/Nithrania.